Hello everyone and welcome back to European Research Showcase. My name is Sam Langford. I'm the coordinator for the Global Science Show, which is putting on this event today and tomorrow as part of Intersections 2023, a UKRI funded public engagement project. Over these days, we've been sharing videos like this one, where we're speaking to amazing researchers from all across the European Union. We've also got profiles, we've got threads of information, and it's all across TikTok, Instagram, Twitter/X, YouTube, wherever you can name it, you'll probably find some content out there. But I'm delighted to be joined by another guest to chat about who they are and what they do. So, hello, Catherine Sheard. Who are you and what do you do?
Hi, Sam. Thank you for having me. So my name is Catherine Sheard. Until Thursday, I'm a postdoc at the University of Bristol, working as an evolutionary biologist. But then this Friday, I start a position at the University of Aberdeen as something called an interdisciplinary fellow, which is a PI position, a faculty position, which means I will get to run my own lab in theory, which is terrifying. I will start as a lab of one. But we'll see how that goes. I'm an evolutionary biologist. I study evolution across very broad swaths of space and time. So I do things like try to get data on all birds or all mammals. And I look at things like variation in what birds or mammals look like or how they behave. I try to study what forces have shaped that variation now, and then try to reconstruct it in the past to see how that may have changed over the past 100 million years or so. Um, I also, this is the interdisciplinary bit of my future job title. I also take these models that have been developed in evolutionary biology to do these deep time reconstructions, and I apply them to variation in human language and culture over the scale of about 6,000 years or so, to look at variation in human behavior and try to see if we can model it using some of the same methods developed in biology.
Wow. So by the time this video goes out, you're going to be in a completely new role. How
Yes.
are you feeling about that? That's like a big change, but an exciting one.
I'm very excited for this. I'm um, there's a lot about my job where there are things that I can see that I want to change, or I want to make better. And often when you're a postdoc, you get told, no, you're just a postdoc. You don't have the power to do this.
Mhm.
So I'm hoping that with a slight change in job title, I may find it a little bit easier to make things better for students, for example, or may find it a little bit easier to do things like apply for grants. I'm also very excited to be moving back to Scotland. I did my first postdoc at the University of St Andrews, and as Sam, you know, I'm a very big Scotland fan.
Oh, so am I. I would have to say it's the best place to be, and Aberdeen's a lovely place to be as well. Um, can you give us a bit of a? You've mentioned St Andrews as the first postdoc job. The journey that you've been on to get to where you are in your career. What's the route been like?
Sure. I didn't take the most straightforward route, especially by British standards. As you folks can probably tell by my accent, I'm American. Um, and I did my undergraduate degree in the US. And in the US, for an undergraduate degree, you don't take just one subject, you also take modules in a bunch of different subjects. So I came in thinking I was going to be a mathematician. I loved math as a teenager. I went to math summer camps, I did math competitions. That was my whole thing. And then I started my undergrad degree at Yale, and three things happened all at once. The first is that I hated math there. I loved the subject, but this whole social experience, the first year sort of program for math majors started with 98 people, and by the end of the year we're down to 23. There are very few women, so much so that the building that we took classes in had no women's bathrooms. um the coursework was intended to be very hard, such that the way that we were intended by the lecturers to do our coursework was to bribe graduate students to help us with it, and that was the method of doing it. And just nothing about it was fun. So I was like starting to look for other options when I realized that this was the name of the game. Thing number two that happened as an undergrad was that I took a course in ornithology because I liked birds. Birds are neat. And through that, I was invited to go to Ecuador to do some field work with the ornithology instructor and the a collections manager for birds at the Yale Peabody Museum of Natural History. And I just absolutely loved getting to wander around the Ecuadorian rainforest with these two, prominent ornithologists. And at one point when we were hiding under a tree, waiting out a rainstorm, my ornithology lecturer turned to me and he said, "You know what? You're really good at this. You should take more science classes next year." And I was like, "Oh, science, that's a thing." Um, and then the third thing that happened is that I needed a part-time job as an undergrad so I could do things like afford food. Um, and ended up in a job working in a linguistics lab, but it was a language evolution lab that did the sort of phylogenetic comparative methods that I now do as my career. And I thought that this was just the neatest thing ever. The facts that you could do mathematics, really interesting mathematics, to study variation over space and time. Something about that just really clicked in my brain. And especially in language and cultural evolution, this was mathematics that women were doing. And at that time, sort of the prominent leaders in this, what was then a very new field, were all female. I thought it was really cool. And at one point, my boss turned to me and she's like, "Okay, I love linguistics, obviously, but you know that they do this in biology too. That's where phylogenetics comes from." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So taking all these things together, by the end of my undergraduate degree, I finally figured out what I wanted to do with my life. Ended up doing a PhD here in the UK on in zoology, but basically doing what I just described, of these using these phylogenetic comparative methods. So these sort of mathematical models to study variation in, for my PhD, birds, but I've since branched out. And then have just stayed in academia ever since. Been lucky enough to do that.
It's really nice like to listen to that story and to see the different clicking points of like the horrible experience of mathematics in undergrad, and then you saying things like, perhaps in this new job I'll be able to make things better for students, or like the chance of going to Ecuador and finding out actually birds are really neat, or the linguistics lab, and all these pieces starting to come together is really cool to hear that. So thank you for sharing that. But now that you're moving into a new role, and the next question that I ask people in these is, what does an average day look like? What do you see an average day looking like for this new role, or is that something that is a while beyond and you're not sure
I'm not sure. Yeah. Um, Certainly, as a postdoc, my average days have been very flexible and very variable, which is something I really love about my research job. I have a chronic illness, so I need a lot of flexibility in my day, which is something that the type of research that I do really affords me. And I'm also someone who really thrives on variety, which is something that I really like about a senior postdoc position and then a PI position like I'm moving into. So some days I can be collecting data for 5 hours straight. Some days I can be writing for 5 hours straight, or someday I can be going back to back from meeting with students and then working with the journal editor and then talking to like a online magazine about my research, and then meeting with the head of department about some EDI issue, and then doing all sorts of very small academic and research related things. I'm especially excited in my new role to be adding teaching to the mix. I did a lot of teaching during my PhD, and I've done some as a postdoc, and it's something that I really enjoy and really love. And so knowing that in the many other tasks of my day that I'll be having sort of regular classroom time and regular contact with students is something that I'm really looking forward to.
and is that likely to be undergrad teaching?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, it's a really exciting time, and that kind of transition period is going to be one nerve wracking and very exciting, I imagine. But if you had a chance to tell a public audience one thing about your work, like an elevator pitch, what would be the one thing you'd want them to know about the work you do?
Um, I wish that people understood more how much our understanding of evolutionary biology, particularly sort of like the secondary school understanding of evolutionary biology, has really been shaped by the Victorians. A lot of our basic instincts for how evolution works is, I mean, quite honestly, old white men who had a lot of hangups about sex. There's a lot of theories that we're only starting to break down now because we realize, for example, that female animals exist, or we realize that our understanding of sex and gender in the animal world are not at all what the Victorians thought, or we realize that what people like me who work in the US and the UK and are exposed mostly to US and UK birds think about how the natural world works doesn't actually apply to the experience of the natural world in the tropics. And that if you work with people from other countries who have their their observations of the natural world are in other settings, they may have very different intuitions for how ecosystems are formed and for how animals interact with each other, and that there's a tremendous amount of value, both sort of I don't respecting people and cooperating with people, but also just very purely scientifically to expanding our knowledge and realizing that it's not just about the fact that the Brits very briefly tried to conquer the world.
Oh well, we're not allowed to talk about that. Like that is not a subject that we're allowed to talk about in this country. Actually, just touching on one last thing in terms of different parts of the world and how the scientific view fits into that. How important is kind of international collaboration in the work that you do? Is that a big part of like the things that you're doing?
So a lot of the work that I do at the moment is desk based. I get my data from reading papers, from reading books, and from working in natural history museums. But that data relies on field work that other people do, and it is incredibly important that that field work is well funded and well respected and goes to places that are not just, you know, White Woods outside Oxford. And I find it very frustrating that people seem to think that the English language peer reviewed scientific literature is the be all to end all of human knowledge. Like, of course it's not. And I think we really need to do a lot more of reaching out to people who are maybe not trained in the English language scientific university discipline that someone like me is, but know a tremendous amount about the birds and mammals that people like me are trying to save. And I think that international cooperation is really the only way we're going to be able to get through the next, decade or two.
Yeah, a lot to think about when we think about the next 20 years. Catherine, thank you so much for coming to give us a little bit of an insight into what it is that you do. Where could people find out more about you if they wanted to?
Um, I am on Twitter/X until it dies at SheardCat. You can also find me on Mastodon, also at SheardCat, or on Blue Sky at SheardCat. Academics are very easy to Google, so.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much for coming along to share, as I've already said. Folks at home, thank you so much for tuning in. If you've got any questions or comments, please leave them below or above this video, depending on where it is that you're watching. If there's anything we can pass along to Catherine or anyone else, we would love to do so. But otherwise, check out all of the other amazing content coming out from the European Research Showcase. We have loads for you to engage with. But otherwise, we'll see you all again very soon.